It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Hello, folks. I'm Larry Kudlow. This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Great pleasure to be with you today. We've got an all-star cast. Lots to talk about. You can get us, by the way. You can live stream us on the internet. LarryKudlowShow.com, LarryKudlowShow.com. That thing runs all across the country, around the world, including the solar system and the Milky Way. Our numbers continue to pick up around the Milky Way. And by the way, during the week, Fox Business Network, FBN, the name of the show is Kudlow. And it runs 4 to 5 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday. Love to have you visit us. If you can't be there at 4, you can text your favorite 9-year-old, and she will show you how to DVR the show. You'll never miss a thing. So, I would say for starters, one big event coming up could be a game changer. Could change the race. Who knows? There's big debate. CNN presidential debate Thursday. I think it's at 8 o'clock. Could be at 9 o'clock. Maybe we'll check. Christian, check what time the debate is. I think it's either 8 or 9. So it'll be a big event, 90 minutes. And the two candidates have been sparring about that. Mr. Trump will get the last word. Mr. Biden gets to stand up at a podium on the right side. But I'll tell you what, in substantive terms, so much of this debate, it was at 9 p.m., 9 to 10:30. So much of this debate should be about the issue of affordability in the economy, where I will argue that Mr. Trump has a decided advantage simply because average families, typical working folks, middle income, lower income folks, cannot afford the Biden economy. And I know there'll be a lot of topics at this debate, but if I were Mr. Trump, I would keep coming back to that. One of the beautiful things about good debates, by the way, is the moderators can ask questions, but you can give the answers you want. You can give whatever answer you want. And I know it's CNN and so forth, but it'll be okay. Trump knows how to handle all kinds of adversity. But here's the thing. We had a number yesterday on housing, which is such a basic part of the economy, and the American dream. Okay, a number on housing. And it's one of the worst numbers we've ever seen. Existing home sales fell by the worst number in 30 years. Okay? The worst number in 30 years. Came in just below 4 million units. During the Trump years, home sales were about 6 million units. This is on a monthly basis. Meanwhile, while sales were collapsing, again, let me emphasize that, worst in 30 years. Meanwhile, home prices, average home prices, came in at a record high as far back as the data, which is beginning in 1999, so it's almost 30 years. The average home price came in at $419,300. If you want to go back to the Trump years, home prices are running around $270,000, just a little over $270,000. So what you have is plunging sales and skyrocketing prices. It's out of reach of the average family. Working folks. I don't mean the richest of the rich. I mean middle-income folks. The American dream. And you know where it's out of reach? It's out of reach for young folks. The American dream so far is out of reach for average earning working young folks. And that's one reason why Donald Trump, by the way, is running better than he ever has among the young. And I might add women. I want to toss women in there because women run the checkbooks. These are kitchen table issues, but the housing thing is probably underrated. People love homes, love their own home. It's the American way. So what you've had here under Biden, skyrocketing prices. And, of course, a lot of this is because of skyrocketing interest rates. Your average mortgage rate running around 7% plus for most of Biden's term. It was about 3.5% to 4% during the Trump years. Even in the healthier red states, you still have a big problem with home prices and mortgage rates. And this should be part of the kitchen table assault that Mr. Trump should make during the debate. That's what folks care about. You know, they don't really care about GDP. You can't take GDP to the store. What you can take to the store is your income, your wallet, your pocketbook. And, of course, here, too, you've got high inflation and high borrowing rates, interest rates, which have squelched middle and lower income purchasing power. So we'll go through this again. Consumer prices during Mr. Biden's tenure have gone up 20%. By the way, during the Trump years, they went up 7%. At an annual rate, the CPI during Biden has been about 6.1%. During Trump years, it was 1.9%. So you see the difference. High inflation versus virtually no inflation. Grocery prices up 21%, gasoline up 45%, electricity up 28%, new and used cars and trucks up about 20%, auto insurance up enormously, home insurance up enormously. And because of high inflation, wages, earnings, income has not kept up. Real income during the Trump years went up $5,820. $5,820. During the Biden years, you ready for this? Real income has fallen $2,080. These are real numbers. I'm not making this up. Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bureau of Economic Analysis. Average family made $5,820 more. That's called a pay raise. This is real income after inflation. Under Mr. Biden, they lost $2,080. That's called a pay cut. By the way, if you put taxes in there, it's worse. So you've got high prices. Wages aren't keeping up. The American dream of owning your own home seems further and further away during the Biden years. Now, again, these are big things. And let's go back to the kitchen table. I don't want to offend anybody, but I think in many homes, it's true, by the way, in the Kudlow home, saintly wife runs the checkbook. I haven't had a checkbook in 30 years. Won't let me near it. In many, many homes, it is the woman of the house that runs the checkbook. Okay, not all, but many. And I will posit, though, that one reason Mr. Trump has done so well with the women's vote is precisely these kitchen table issues. By the way, if you have a car loan, that thing runs up 10, 12% now. That was about half as much during the Trump years. If you have a credit card, whoa, those astronomical, 25 to 30% in many cases. Take a look at your card. Take a look at what they're charging you. Women know this. The checkbook person in the home knows this all too well. So I think that for starters, and we'll talk about this over the course of the show, this debate coming up is very important. I mean, I dare say the whole world will be watching. And I know it'll cover foreign policy, it'll cover social issues, and cover the border, etc. But the economy at the kitchen table, basic consumer goods, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Don't think so. Just look at your home prices, mortgage rates, auto car loan rates, credit card rates, income falling, prices rising. Now, if Donald Trump focuses on this in a moderate, steady tone, and I know he can. I was with him last week, and I reported back. I was the guy who interviewed him in front of the Business Roundtable CEOs, all the big shots. He can do it. Trump can be very, very good when he's focused. But he's got a lot of ammo to work with, got a lot of content. Kitchen table. You can just picture it in the kitchen. A little table, a couple chairs where you have your morning breakfast or your dinner. Anyway, those numbers look pretty bad. And the numbers that came out yesterday on the crash in housing, I mean, it's been a steady drumbeat of declining home sales and rising home prices and rising mortgage rates. So think about that, folks. Think about all that. And think about this debate. We're going to have, at the top of the show, two pretty shrewd political analysts. Joe Concha is going to talk about the debate, and Roger Stone is going to talk about the debate, my fellow host here on WABC Radio. So, folks, I'm Kudlow. We'll take a quick break. On this side of the break, I want to talk about a bad Supreme Court decision about stocks and bonds and wealth and all the rest of it. But we'll start out today on the kitchen table. The kitchen table's not looking good. The debate has got to bring that out for Mr. Trump to clinch the whole story. I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
One additional tidbit this week, which we'll talk about more about during the stock market segment in our third hour. But, you know, the Supreme Court, which is a conservative court, bolstered by 3 conservative justices nominated by Donald Trump when he was president and confirmed by the Senate. But the Supremes, I don't know, they kind of tripped up. There's an issue here on wealth taxes and this whole business of unrealized capital gains. All right, hang on now. There's nothing hard or technical about that. You know, if you own a stock, if you own say you own $100, stock's worth $100, but you don't sell it, you just hang on to it, and say it goes to $120. Well, left-wingers like Senator Elizabeth Warren or Senator Bernie Sanders, God bless them, it's not personal, it's policy disagreement, but the lefties want you to be taxed on the increase from 100 to 120, even though you didn't sell anything. You didn't sell it. It's called realization. You have to realize the gain. But they say, no, you don't. You have to pay your fair share. You don't pay enough in taxes. Now, the top 1% of income earners in this country pay half the taxes. Half. 45, I think, 46%. They earn about 20% of the income. They pay almost half the taxes. But the left will never be satisfied. And also, this is bad for investment. I mean, you do not want to deter. You want to have incentives. I want it to pay. I want it to be profitable after tax for people to make an investment. But if I'm going to sit there and say to you, you didn't sell your stock. By the way, the best stock market strategy, if you ask me, is to buy and hold in the long run. And then you sell it, you know, and you get into your, shall we say, golden years. Buy and hold. Don't outguess the market. That's my philosophy. Not everyone agrees. I'm a passive investor. I say buy the S&P index and hold it forever. You own the whole American economy. You practically own the whole world economy. But the point here with the Supreme Court is, on this case, which had to do, by the way, with the repatriation of foreign earnings, which was the 2017 Tax Act. That's the narrow issue. And this couple had to pay the repatriation. But the Supremes left the door open for some future decision that would tax your unrealized gain. Okay? Not good. I mean, stocks, antiques, art. If my whole point here is nobody knows what the value is unless there's a market transaction. Only the market can tell you. Yes, so you have to sell. A has to sell to B before you can tell what A's assets are worth. I don't know, 50 years ago, God help me, when I first came to Wall Street, I learned very soon the old axiom that an asset is only worth what someone will pay for it. That's all. The rest of it's theory, physics, highfalutin, blah, blah, blah. So the Supremes, unfortunately, declared that the realization of income is not a constitutional requirement, quote unquote. That's bad. Now, there were dissenters. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, Justice Samuel Alito said no, that income to be taxed without apportionment must be realized. The commonly understood meaning of the term income when the 16th Amendment was ratified requires that a gain be realized. So they're right. Now, this isn't the last word. I'm just saying it's a bad idea. They left the door open. I wish they had slammed the door closed. But you don't want to be taxing wealth. Wealth and investment, that's the heartbeats of the economy. I mean, what the heck? I don't even want to. You know what? We should have indexed capital gains for inflation. And by the way, I think I don't even want to tax capital gains. You already tax income enough. Why tax capital? Why tax investment? I want America to grow 5% a year. We'll be right back with more Roger Stone and Joe Concha on the debates. I'm Kudlow. Stop taxing.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Larry Kudlow. We're going to Hotlanta. Hotlanta on Thursday. It's probably hot as hell down there, too. Pretty hot up here in New York. We're going to talk about the debate. We've got two all-stars, Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, and I have to read it just one more time. Author of the book, Come On, Man, The Truth About Biden's No Good, Horrible, Very Bad Presidency, and my longtime pal, Roger Stone, shrewdest political consultant ever, host of WABC Radio, The Roger Stone Show. All right, gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for doing this. So how about this? I'll start with Joe Concha. Joe, is this going to turn the race? Is the debate going to jolt the race? Is the debate going to be a game changer for the race? What do you think?
It could be an earthquake not seen since San Francisco. If Joe Biden does what many of us think he will do, which is, look, guys, there's this argument that, well, Joe Biden's going to be hopped up on something, Red Bull, Pixie Sticks, Mountain Dew, whatever, or whatever they may give him to give him some energy. That still doesn't help him with his memory. So while the State of the Union, he was loud and demonstrative and obviously passionate about whatever was written for him, nothing's written for him this time. There's no teleprompter to go to. He's going to have to remember things, including defending his record. And if Donald Trump is smart, he goes in, let's say he's asked about immigration, for example. Trump says, all right, I want three things day one. That's resumption of border wall construction. That is remain in Mexico policy reinstated. That's the end of catch and release. I allot the remainder of my time to Joe Biden, and he can explain what Remain in Mexico is, why he opposes it, and why he opposes border wall construction and embraces catch and relief. Joe, the floor is yours. He does that. You put the onus on Biden and his memory, and I think you're going to have a uncle was eaten by cannibals moment, guys.
Biden might not remember the question that Trump asked.
That's a very good point.
Think about that. Roger Stone, what do you think about this whole story?
Well, Joe Biden will talk about January 6th. Trump is a convicted felon. The Republicans want to end a woman's right to abortion. Oh, and by the way, they're going to cut your Social Security. That's because he has nothing positive that he could possibly talk about. They've cooked the unemployment and the inflation records. That's numbers. That's pretty clear. We're teetering on the edge of World War III in two different theaters, the Middle East and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We have open borders causing a crime epidemic, a fentanyl epidemic, fiscal problems in counties, cities, states across the country. He has nothing positive to say, so it'll be an all-out assault on Trump. Trump, on the other hand, can talk about record economic growth, the most robust economy in American history, including wage growth and job growth. He can talk about peace in the world because he started no new wars, but he brought troops back from the Middle East without the countries they were leaving collapsing into the hands of the enemy when they left. Trump can run a positive record of peace and prosperity. Joe Biden has nothing positive to run on. This is potentially a calamity.
You know, Joe Concha, I'd say, Roger hit on some of it. Donald Trump's got to go to the kitchen table, and he's got big advantages. And one of the things we were talking about on the TV show yesterday, and I mentioned it this morning, is a calamitous housing situation. We had the worst drop in home sales in 30 years and the highest prices on record, Joe. And, of course, mortgage rates are about 7% plus. Mortgage rates are almost twice what they were under Trump. Prices are almost twice what they were under Trump. And sales are like, I don't know, half to one-third, 40% lower under Trump, higher under Trump. I mean, the American dream is out of reach. And a lot of this not only is for middle-income folks, working folks, but young people. I mean, I'd like to see Trump really pound away. Young people cannot afford to buy a home. And I think that's one reason that you see the polls showing how well Trump is doing among young people.
So I'm the youngest of three, and my brother and sister got married early, married their high school sweethearts, and they had kids very early, like 21, 22 years old. The reason why I bring this up is my nieces and nephews are now in their 20s, and none of them, they're at the house last week for Father's Day, none of them are under any illusion that they'll ever own a home, that they're going to rent for life, basically. And that never was the bar that we had in this country. So, yeah, inflation is a cruel tax on everyone. Obviously, these mortgage rates that you talked about, we have credit card debt over $1 trillion in this country. People are just basically chasing interest and paying minimum payments at this point. And obviously, we talk about crime, and Joe Biden's going to tout probably, I would imagine, if I were to predict that crime is falling in American cities. No, prosecutions are falling in American cities, and therefore that skews the numbers. And then we talked about immigration. I hope that Trump hits Biden really hard on the fact that more than 450 terrorists on the FBI terror watch list had been apprehended at the U.S. southern border since Joe Biden took office. You know how many crossed into this country during Trump's 4 years? 14, right? So this is a national security, to use Roger's word, calamity, and Trump has the record to run on, and it's very simple. You say, but my fellow Americans, were you better off under Donald Trump or better off under Joe Biden? And when people ask themselves that question, Trump wins in a landslide.
You know, Roger, I'll get your take on it. I don't think calling Trump a convicted felon is going to work for Biden. I just don't think it's going to work. I mean, it's in the numbers. People have discounted it. His own son just became a convicted felon. I mean, I just don't think that's going to work.
I agree with you, Larry. I also think that people should recognize that Trump is going into very disadvantageous situation here. Your two moderators, Jake the Fake Tapper and Dana Bash, Now you add that to Joe Biden, so it's going to be 3-on-1. Secondarily, of course, they can turn off Trump's microphone while Joe is speaking, which I think cramps Trump's debate style. People want to see the two candidates mix it up. They don't want to see canned statements by Joe in which he can't be contradicted. And then this idea that they should both be seated. Jack Kennedy and Richard Nixon were not seated in 1960. Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter were not seated in 1980. It's because Joe can't stand up for 90 minutes.
Are they seated?
Everyone knows it.
No, but
I believe they are.
I think there's Biden chose to stand up the right podium. This podium on the right side. Joe Concha, I don't know if you know the answer. Originally seated, but I think they wound up. They're going to stand up behind podiums.
I think that Biden was negotiating to be seated. I don't know how that was resolved. I'll be honest. I'm not going to say something I'm not fully.
Here, I'm going to get producer Christian. Christian,
break.
look this up. Right, we'll look it up during the debate.
During the break, we'll look it up as well. But either way, I think in the end, yes, Roger's right. This is in terms of the moderators, in terms of the network, the topics that are going to be broached are going to be things that the American people really don't care about. But in the end, Trump doesn't have to play that game. He could just answer the questions that he wants asked, right? And so it's not about inflation originally. He could pivot to that. He could pivot to immigration and pivot to the fact that this is a president that is 81 years old and is aging like mayonnaise in the sun at this point. So you could go 100 different ways with this. But if Biden doesn't perform well, and you hear people like Van Jones on CNN saying, if he doesn't do well here, it's over for him, that's the Obama people speaking. And if they're saying that, then you're going to start to see the process of having Biden trying to convince him to step down and somebody replacing him. But I think even that will go even worse for Democrats because I don't think people are going to like very much the whole communist, we're going to install a candidate without voters deciding thing. So I think, this debate is everything when it comes to this campaign. It's the biggest moment, that's certainly for sure.
Jake Tapper's not so bad, Roger. I know Jake very well. I used to do it.
Sorry, Larry.
I did a Sunday show when I was in the White House. I probably did a Sunday show 50 times. Dana Bash is pretty rough trade. Jake's not. Everyone beats on Jake. I love that.
Larry, with all due respect, Jake said that I would enjoy going to prison. He's very bad.
Well,
so much for that.
He shouldn't have said that. He should, because we love Roger Stone. And anyway, but I understand. But I think in a good debate, Roger, no matter what question they ask you, you give the answer you want to give. And I think Trump's a master at that. And I think Joe Concha is right. I don't think Biden's going to be able to even finish an answer. He's not going to run out of steam because his memory, he won't have the memory. I mean, I think that's going to be the biggest problem. They're going to – here, let's step back a minute. Biden is spending the whole week up in Camp David where there's going to be briefings, okay? So they're going to try to punch numbers and arguments into his head, Roger Stone. How do you think that's going to turn out?
That will not work out well at all.
That's what I think.
And interestingly, by the way, when they tried that with Ronald Reagan in one debate, it didn't work. It's more about style and presentation and the big picture. Yeah. It's not about being able to state economic statistics and other statistics. Look, if I were the president, I would say, look, the last time I debated Joe Biden, he looked right into the camera and he told you that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation, that neither he nor any member of his family had ever taken a penny from any foreign entity. He lied to you folks then. Why would you believe anything he has to say tonight? That's how I would start.
Yeah, Joe, right, too many. I mean, I think Trump should have a couple of numbers, but too many numbers. It's the big picture, right? I mean, you just want to paint a picture of prosperity, peace and prosperity. Peace and prosperity in the border. I mean, that's also the key thing. Border. What do you think, Joe?
I think that one number I cited before is very important. I don't think many people are aware that more than 400 terrorists have crossed into this country since Biden took office. And those are the ones we caught, by the way. Like, those are the inept ones. I would imagine the more skilled ISIS-K types can get in here without detection and can melt into the population and plan whatever they're planning. So 400 versus 14, that's one. Another one is, hey, Joe, what was the inflation rate when you took office? Let him say 9% in front of the entire country again, like he said over and over again. We all know it was 1.4%. So, yeah, don't get bogged down in numbers because they don't play well on TV unless you have context. So 400 versus 14 in terms of terrorists, 9% versus 1.4% in terms of inflation, and gas up more than 50% since Trump left office. I think all those things resonate with people because those are things they feel every day or they fear in terms of terrorism.
Yeah, just a couple numbers, right? I like that.
3 or 4.
And I think, too, Roger, the American dream is out of reach for young people. It's out of reach for a lot of people. And I think the housing crisis is really something that you can throw at Biden. It's all on his watch. The American dream's gone. And women, actually, let's take a break. I want to come back. Trump is doing very well. Big New York Times story. Let you guys talk about this. Trump's doing very well among women. And one of my theories, whether this is right or wrong, many households in America, it is the woman of the house who controls the checkbook. And she's the one who understands how prices have skyrocketed and interest rates and debt and all the rest of it. Anyway, we got Joe Concha, Fox News contributor. We got Roger Stone, Roger's Show, WABC Radio, The Roger Stone Show, Sundays, 4 to 6 p.m. It's a must listen to. I'm Kudlow. Be right back about the debate.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
We are talking about the debate, which could be very important, could jolt the whole race. Debate on Thursday, CNN presidential debate. That, by the way, will be simulcast on Fox Business and Fox News. And we're talking with Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, and we're talking with Roger Stone, host of WABC Radio's The Roger Stone Show. Sundays, 4 to 6 p.m. I like to promo a show. They are standing at the podium. Mark Simone, our dear friend, he texted me, and I thought so. That just was worked out this week. Trump gets the last word in the debate, but they flipped a coin, and I don't even know why, but Biden wanted the right podium. And they're rehearsing up at Camp David. They got him standing up there for 90 minutes every day to get used to it. That, according to our great friend Mark Simone, Hall of Fame, often on this show. Anyway, I want to go back into some of these issue things. There's two stories this week that were very interesting to me. One is from the Wall Street Journal, Jason Riley, very smart fella, very distinguished African-American scholar and columnist. The Journal editorial pages have basically been pretty negative on Trump, although they may be coming around. But Jason's piece, Trump gets serious about black voters, okay? That's point number one. And I will say to our two panelists, you got Mr. Trump this weekend, right today, I think, giving a speech in the heart of Philadelphia at Temple University's football stadium. And you got Joe Biden retreating to Camp David, where there's, nobody except his family and the Secret Service. And the other one is Biden's lead. This is New York Times. Biden's lead with women is smaller than Trump's with men. A warning for Democrats. This is from the New York Times. Holy cow. What do you make of that, Joe Concha? Let's start with the women's story, the New York Times women's story.
Just incredible. Everything is incredible compared to 2020 when you compare those numbers. When you see that Donald Trump's leading among Hispanics. Gee, I thought illegal immigration was supposed to bring more Hispanic voters in. Nope, turns out that people who actually live here legally don't like their jobs being taken away and their social services being taken away to take care of those who shouldn't be here. So that backfired. The black vote, same deal. I mean, you had, I think it was Joe Biden got something like close to 86% of the vote among black voters in 2020. And now he's polling in the low 60s. We're talking about nearly like a 30-point drop. And in cities like Atlanta, Philadelphia, Detroit, and those key swing states of Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, if he's losing those sort of margins just among black voters and among suburban women, it's over if these things hold. And you say, well, there's plenty of time left before the election. Maybe Joe Biden can come back. But when you're completely deteriorating the way that he is mentally and physically, I don't see a comeback in this guy, and I don't see conditions on the ground, most importantly, changing at this point. So, everything is bad news right now, and that's why we're hearing so much about this replacement theory as far as Biden and Kamala Harris, as far as not being the ticket that people are voting on in November.
Oh, the replacement theory. The replacement theory. God, I almost forgot about it. Roger Stone, the Biden replacement theory? You think there's anything to that?
I think I may be one of the first people in the country to predict way back at the Turning Point USA conference in Palm Beach last year that Joe Biden would be replaced specifically by Michelle Obama.
Wow.
I'm not saying she's running for president. I'm not saying she wants to run for president. I'm saying that once Joe announces that he's not going to stand for re-election, releases his delegates, that a runaway convention would draft the strongest candidate I think they could nominate, and that would be Michelle Obama. I stick by my prediction. Now, that causes them an issue because Kamala Harris would normally be in line, but they buy her off with a Supreme Court nomination promise, which she's a former Attorney General of California. And then they can put Gavin Newsom, a white man, on the ticket to balance the ticket. I've been predicting this for actually well over 2 years. Stick to my prediction.
You know, Joe, he's like Simone. Simone says it every week, the replacement theory. What do you think, Joe? You heard, Roger Stone, the mean, tough, cynical, political guy. What do you think of that?
I think it's completely plausible. When you consider everything we've seen from Democrats and people saying they'll never do that, they'll never try to take Trump off the ballot in places like Colorado and Maine. Yep, they did. And they're not really going to hold off all these cases against him until an election year, will they? Yes, they did. So I could go down the line. Sure, desperate times call for desperate measures. And a Michelle Obama, Gavin Newsom ticket, I could see it. I guess my question, and if I could ask Roger a question real quick, do you think that they would do better against Trump with a ticket like that or worse?
I think it's too early to say. At least they wouldn't have to run on Joe Biden's record. They would both say, well, that's not us. We didn't do that. We have nothing to do with that. That was Joe Biden. On the other hand, Michelle Obama has no public record, no voting record, no policy record. There's nothing to attack. This idea that a first lady is automatically qualified to be president, Hillary Clinton tried that out. They used that argument as to why she should be a U.S. Senator and Secretary of State, a disaster in both jobs. I think, look, they are growingly desperate. They're apoplectic about Joe's numbers. To go back to something Larry said, I study the polls very religiously, and I look at many of them to make sure that there's a trend. Trump's inroads among African Americans could bring him the highest vote among African Americans of a Republican presidential candidate since Richard Nixon in 1960, who got almost a third. Trump is going to break 25%, and I think that breaks the back of the Democrats.
That's landslide stuff. I guess we got to get out of there. That's the music. Joe Concha, thank you. Roger Stone, thank you. Very lively, gentlemen. The Biden replacement theorem. Anyway, I'm Kudlow. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with Steve Forbes on the other side.
It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Larry Kudlow. This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Great to be with you, as always. And we are fortunate enough to have the great Steve Forbes, chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media, and author of the book Inflation, What It Is, Why It's Bad, and How to Fix It. And, folks, you got to go out and buy this book. He's got the new edition in paperback, and one click, and you can get it on whatever site you want to go, Amazon or whatever. Steve, thanks for doing this. We appreciate it. You know, Steve, I want to talk to you about the economy and whether America's going bankrupt or not. But in the prior segment, we had Roger Stone and Joe Concha. Roger Stone makes a big case that they're going to replace Biden. And I'm not mistaken, you've held that view for quite some time also.
Yes, it has been for a couple of years. And
right.
Biden's VIX index is very high. A lot of volatility when it looks like he's going to drop out. Then he pulls off the State of the Union. So it goes up and down. But there's no mistaking the man's mental acuity is declining. And that's why this debate is so important. He does not have a teleprompter. I don't know what elixir they're pumping into him. Certainly not one the FDA would approve. We'd all want to know what it is. Oh, yes, you can come to life. Start shouting. Yes. Trump is going to be ready. He knows what they're going to hit him with. January 6th, you still feel the election was stolen, women's right to choose, all that kind of stuff. And hopefully by now he's ready to pivot and say get to the real issues and then hit them hard and then come out with favoring tax cuts, saying waiters and waitresses, your time of liberation is at hand. You don't have to worry about IRS agents knocking on your door. Did you not report that 25-cent extra tip you got in the jar? And so I think he can have fun with it. And on foreign policy, everybody knows the disaster that's out there. And so, again, just the contrast. And also, as you've hit him, not hit him, you've recommended, and he seems to be doing it, and that is talk about the future and the economy. And one of the things that's going to face poor Trump come January is this crowd has put in, as you know, a record tsunami-like a number of regulations that are going to start to do real harm to the economy. And he's going to have to work overtime to sidetrack that stuff. As you know, in California, they're now ready to ban diesel engines for crying out loud. And you say, well, we can go in trucks, but they're banning trucks. They have to use electricity, and trucks and big trains, electricity can't pull the kind of freight that they have to haul.
You know, Steve, California, you just remind me of this, and I should have asked you about this on the TV show yesterday. So the California Supreme Court has just ruled that the voters can't vote on a tax limitation bill, like what was it, Jarvis Scan years ago, 1978?
Yeah, Prop 13.
Prop
legendary.
13, right. So they won't even let them vote on that now. And I forgot to ask you about that yesterday.
Well, this is an example of modern socialism. This is an example of the deep state. The empire knows it's under assault. So they want to, and I love it how they say, oh, the Republicans and Trump are a threat to democracy. Well, they love democracy as long as they get their own way. But when it looks like they aren't, then suddenly they come up with these convoluted decisions like you had in the California Supreme Court, which is an outrage. You know, in California, for crying out loud, as long as you get the requisite number of signatures, you can get anything on that ballot. Banning Donald Duck or whatever, they put anything on the ballot. So this idea that you can't have a tax limitation proposition is preposterous. And the Republicans out there, they won't take the state, but they certainly could pick up a couple of congressional seats, hammering home. They won't let you decide what taxes you pay. Wasn't that what the American Revolution was about? No taxation without representation? You know, they don't have tea parties in California. They have other kinds, but get another tax revolt.
What other kind? No, never mind. We're not going to go down that road. It's so great. One other point we didn't talk about on the TV yesterday, but this business, the Supreme Court left the door open for taxing unrealized capital gains. Now, Steve Forbes, of course, you have been an advocate for a long time, and I have too. First of all, we should have indexed capital gains for inflation years and years ago. They never got around to it. We've indexed income taxes for inflation. We never indexed capital gain. But, Steve, I would posit not only is it a really bad idea to have an unrealized capital gains tax, I don't even know. Why do we have to tax capital gains? Why should we tax wealth at all?
Well, it's a very good question. And the Republicans have never mastered the debate on that because the Democrats always come back and say, oh, you're just giving another tax break to the wealthy. And you got to remind people, 401ks, that affects the price of stuff in their 401ks. And even though they have some housing provisions that lower the effective capital gains tax, you still, after a certain level, pay a big capital gains tax on the sale of a house. That hits home with people since they're all leaving New York and New Jersey and Illinois and moving to friendlier climes, moving away from California for the first time since it became a state in 1850. They're moving out more than they're moving in. So they have to hit that. And that's why if you combine it, and Trump had a good suggestion on this, I know some people are attacking it, do the tips.
Yes.
And also come up with a way in which the Social Security tax gets lowered a little bit. Again, though, how are you hurting the seniors? But everyone knows you from $1, you're paying that 15.3%, half by you and half by your employer. And so if you package something that gives something to everyone, the Democrats will attack it. But as we saw with the 2017 tax cut, you had some great business tax cuts, which were down mightily to the economy. You doubled the exemption, so everyone got more in their paychecks. Put that kind of package together, and people will say, we don't care what the Democrats say. They mess things up. Let's try this.
I mean, I think that as a general matter, you should be taxing consumption and not investment, or you should tax income but not capital. But now the Supreme's opened the door to taxing unrealized capital gains, which is even worse. It multiplies the sin. I mean, an economy needs capital and investment. That's the seed corn for economic growth, for wages, for productivity. I mean, you're right. The GOP doesn't really. They're afraid to sort of deal with that. When you ran for president, you talked about this all the time. This is very important stuff. We should be promoting incentives to invest, long-term investment. Right, that's the
putting your savings to work, putting your 401k to work.
Right,
because without investment, it's like not planting the seeds. You don't have a growing economy. Look at Cuba. Look at North Korea. Look at some of these other countries. Look at Europe, which is having slow growth and had for years because they don't have enough investment. So investments like planting the seeds. You want growth. And yet that's the way you get real more wages, not the situation we have today. And so learn to do it. And that's where on the campaign trail, you test these ideas out. What resonates with people? What gets across to people? What analogies can you use to get across to people? And then run with it. And, this sounds a little obscure, but Abraham Lincoln, when he was debating Douglas back in 1858, a lot of people in Illinois did not like the idea if you ended slavery, all the blacks would come north and take away their jobs. And Lincoln deftly handled that this goes beyond those goes to human rights, that they could make you a slave. And he perfected arguments that he won the popular vote. In those days, the legislatures elected senators, so he didn't get to the Senate. But you take these issues that Democrats think you can't handle and learn to handle it. And that way you get a real mandate so they can't easily undo it if they come back in power again. Yeah,
voters are a lot smarter than politicians realize. And you're right. I think the Trump's proposal for tax-free tips for waitresses, people in the gig economy, Uber drivers, whatever, I think it's a secret weapon. I think it's a great point. Last one, Steve, for us. Is America going bankrupt? I mean, these new CBO numbers, $52 trillion of debts, 122% of GDP, $2 trillion of deficits as far as the eye can see. Are we going bankrupt? And what's going to happen to the U.S. dollar if these fiscal matters aren't fixed?
Well, I think the way to put it is these people are, if they continue in power wrecking, are going to wreck the country, whatever you want to call it. You're going to have a lower standard of living. You're going to have unemployment rising. Remember, retail sales didn't set the world on fire. It came out pretty disappointing. And so you've made the point, and it's a good one, and we should all make that point. If we go from a 1 or 2% economy to 3.5%, 4%, which is what we did historically for 200 years, or even get it for a while at 5%, which we did in some points in the Kennedy years and the Reagan years, by golly, those impossible situations become a lot more soluble. And you have time to do it. You have time to bring in a new Social Security system for younger people where part of their paycheck goes to their own personal retirement account out of the hands of the Washington politicians.
I love that. I know you've touted this for many years. I think it's exactly right. And you're also right. Over the long, long haul, we've been growing the United States 3.5% per year. But somehow in the last 25 years, we've slowed this thing, and we've got to get that moving again. That's, tax policy is going to play a major role in that. And to your point, the strong dollar's got to play a major role in that, too. All right, Steve Forbes, you are the best. Folks, just one more time, Steve's latest book, Inflation, What It Is, Why It's Bad, and How to Fix It. He's got a new edition out in paper. One click, and you can have it, the great Steve Forbes. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Larry.
All right. Folks, we'll take a quick break. I want to talk some more about the economy with Joe Livornia, who was the former chief economist of the White House National Economic Council. Are we heading for recession or not? I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
So the question now is, what's the economy look like? Not what it should look like. What does it actually look like? So we're going to bring in an ace, my friend Joe Livornia, who was a former chief economist at the White House National Economic Council. He is now chief economist at SMBC Nikko Securities. Joe, thanks for doing this, buddy.
Thank you, Larry.
So I'm reading your one of your latest pieces from yesterday. The leading economic index fell again, declining 0.5% in May, the 26th decline in the last 27 months, the lowest since April 2020. That was pandemic. Plus, Joe, retail sales looked awfully weak when we got it earlier in the month for May. And also, yesterday, the housing numbers, existing home sales, and actually starts were also very bad. I mean, it looks like you're in a real slump in housing. So what's going on here? How soft is the economy?
Larry, the economy, the leading indicators of the economy, not just the index you highlighted, but the yield curve, bank lending standards, temporary or staffing employment, all those variables have been saying the economy should have entered recession a long time ago. And because it has a lot of economists have sort of given up hope and say, look, we're not going to have a recession. And maybe they're correct. Question is, why hasn't the economy turned over? Because the cyclical parts like housing, manufacturing, ISM, for example, has been below 50 for many, many months. They all are either in recession or close to a recession. I think the answer why the economy hasn't dipped into a downturn, Larry, is because the government is spending a tremendous amount of money. We're running budget deficits this year close to 6%, maybe close to 7% actually this year, with unemployment under 4%. I think that's why the economy looks and feels strong, but there are major pockets that aren't doing particularly well. So I think, as long as the government spends way beyond its means, it keeps growth afloat for the time being. But this, to me, Larry, is not what I call a stable equilibrium. And I do eventually look for the economy to tilt to the downside, but just probably not yet.
You're right about the government spending and deficits, $2 trillion as far as the eye can see. But all this other, if consumers are soft and business is soft. I mean, I was looking, I know industrial production went up. It's been very soft. It went up in May, but if you look under the hood, business equipment spending is very bad. So retail sales are soft. Disposable income, right? Real disposable income. So that's income after taxes and after inflation. That's been actually negative. And real wages, real weekly wages continue to fall because hours worked are soft. I mean, I don't know, Joe. It's a funny story. The traditional leading indicators don't seem to be leading indicators anymore, but it's sort of hard to understand what can hold up this economy much longer. One last one, Joe Livornia. The Atlanta Fed GDP Now tracker, they're looking at 3% in the second quarter. And I don't know what they're smoking because I don't think that's possible.
Yeah, no, 3% to me is you are going to get a big rebound in government spending, which was weak in the first quarter. So that's part of it. But the weakness in consumer spending, I do think, is notable. And, one of the things that's happening, Larry, again, the index leading indicator probably overweights manufacturing. And it's only about 10% of the economy. So that's one of the reasons why maybe may not be as accurate as it normally is. But the other thing that's happening is with the government spending as much money as it is, the Fed's keeping rates higher longer to offset the inflation that the government effectively is helping create by keeping aggregate demand artificially higher than it otherwise supposed to be. My guess, though, Larry, is that with the labor market weakening, you are seeing softness in the household survey. I do believe the payroll data are overstating strength because of these adjustments they make that probably don't fully capture what's been happening. Because if you look at the small business surveys, they don't look very good. Their hiring intentions, their capital spending plans suggest softness, which is why that business equipment series you highlighted in the production data probably more accurate as far as where the broader trends are going.
And Joe, one more thing. Weekly unemployment claims have just started to jump up.
Yeah, they're edging higher. It's something to keep an eye on. I mean, we were well under 200. Now we're up around 230, 235. It's like a slow burn, Larry. I guess the point is that the economy is holding up. We have to ask ourselves why. And we have never run a budget deficit close to 7%, having last year was around 6%, with the economy close to full employment. And then therefore, we have to figure out what does the government spending side of the equation doing to the economy, and how is that changing traditional modeling? At some point, I do worry the bond market will not tolerate all of this spending. And the fact that we've front-loaded so much supply in the bill sector, 75%, Larry, of the $2 trillion we're issuing is inside 1 year. The Treasury, at some point, regardless of who's in office, is going to have to extend their borrowing mix much further out the curve. Does that lead to a tightening of financial conditions with much higher interest rates, higher mortgage rates?
Yeah.
Possible.
All right. Great rundown. Joe Lavorgna, again, he's chief economist at SMBC Nikko Securities. He was my chief economist at the White House National Economic Council. Best of the best. Thank you, Joe. Folks,
Thank you, Larry.
A quick break, and then Ken Kachigian on Nixon and Reagan.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
So, folks, we welcome an old friend of mine, Ken Kachigian, who was a chief speechwriter and a political advisor to President Reagan. He was a longtime aide and speechwriter to President Nixon. I think if such a thing is possible, Ken Kachigian might even be older than I am. I didn't know if such a thing was possible.
I'm older than everybody, Larry. Good morning.
That's the way I always feel. But anyway, he's got a new book out. It's called Behind Closed Doors, In the Room with Reagan and Nixon. Okay, I have the book. I have not yet read the book, but it's got a lot of juicy stuff in it. Ken Kachigian, one of the things we've been talking about this morning is this debate coming up on Thursday, the CNN presidential debate, Trump versus Biden. Now, you know, Nixon had debates with Kennedy and Reagan had debates with Carter and Mondale, and you were involved in all these things. So what advice would you give? What advice would you give Donald Trump, for example? Let's start there. Drawing from your experiences of many centuries of political advice, what advice would you give?
Well, for former President Trump, I think the main thing I would do is try to hold President Biden accountable, and that's the main thing, is to keep him accountable for his failures. To me, the Republicans need to have a new brand on the Democrats. I call it the DAGA brand, the Democrats Against Government Accountability. They need to be held accountable for inflation, for the border crisis, for the crime that's been rampant throughout their administration. And the best thing that President Trump could do is to keep President Biden held accountable for all the problems. You know, out here in California, which is outside the bubble that you all live in back east, Larry, I see people in real life. I see men and women at the checkout counter at the supermarkets, and you know what they're doing? They're using coupons, not food stamps, but coupons that they get out of these handouts that you get in the mail, and these are coupons that get discounts for bread and for bacon and for meats and for eggs, because they can off and 15 cents off because they're desperate because of the inflation that Biden has caused. And then the gas out here is, $5.50, $5.60, $5.70 a gallon. And that's because of the inflation caused during the Biden administration. So accountability is the term I would use.
Did you advise in the 80 debates, Reagan versus Carter? Were you with Reagan? Were you advising him then?
Well, I was advising him throughout the campaign. I was the chief speechwriter throughout that campaign, and when we came down to the end, I was not involved in the debate preparation, but I did have a line that I wrote for President Reagan at the Oxford Mall in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, back in early October, that you may have heard of before. Now, the line was written initially as, "Are you better off than you were in 1976?" And we changed it just a little bit in the debate, and it came off as, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" And Reagan used it in the debate against Jimmy Carter, and he used it and said, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" And that line resonated. And then he polished it up, and in the final half-hour speech in the campaign, he not only added to it, he used it 7 or 8 times in terms of food prices, in terms of inflation, in terms of mortgage rates, and he drove it home and drove it home and drove it home, and of course it ended up in a landslide victory in 1980.
Don't you think that would work for Trump?
Oh, there's no question. You ask that question for anybody. That's the other thing. Get in the car with an Uber driver.
Yeah.
And ask them what life is like. You know why there's most Uber drivers are doing this, or Lyft drivers, or whoever they are. They're doing it because they're trying to earn a second living. Because they can't make an earning on their day jobs. They're driving. They're taking these jobs to earn a decent wage so they can survive.
And Trump is saying, Ken Kachigian, I'm going to make your tips tax free.
Yeah,
which is, I think, genius, brilliant.
That's very smart, because I was just on a little 3-day vacation, and these waitresses work and waiters work very, very hard, and the maids and others that you leave tips for, they work very, very hard, and I don't. That would be if they're listening to Trump, that's a genius strategy. I've got to say.
I noticed in the book, I was skimming through the book, and I do want to read the book, but I noticed in the book you almost gave me credit for teaching you economics when you were writing the Reagan tax cut speeches. It was close.
Well,
it was a very nice mention. It was a nice mention. I'll give you that.
You were a pest, Larry, because when we were working on the economic recovery plan, which saved America in 1981, to cut taxes and cut regulations, I will tell America right now, Larry Kudlow was there hovering over me, working on that speech.
Well, I was only 13 years old.
Hovering over me, making sure that the words were just precisely right to put on President Reagan's desk.
Well, I wanted the numbers right. That was my job in those days. I mean, I was a young man. I think I was 28 or 29 years old. I was the assistant budget director, but I can remember you walking into a cabinet council meeting and trying to get wisdom. And that's how the first time I ever met you. But Ken Kachigian, talk just a second about Nixon. Now, you weren't with Nixon in the Kennedy debate, were you?
No.
No, you're not that old. Okay.
Not quite that old.
I got it. But let me ask you something. Nixon was a brilliant man, but he was a terrible economics president. Terrible economic. I'm going to put Watergate aside. I've been interested in talking about that. But, Nixon, I had Ed Cox, the son-in-law, had me meet him a couple times down at One New York Plaza, Federal Plaza, when Nixon was out of office. This is in the mid-'80s. But I just had limited, but I was very impressed with him. I read several of his books. He was very gracious to me. But his economics were terrible, Ken Kachighian. The thing I never understood, he had good people around him. He had George Shultz around him. He had Milton Friedman around him. He had Arthur Burns around him. But they did everything wrong. They spent money. They had wage and price controls. They moved the dollar off the gold standard. I mean, it was just a disaster. And I always wondered, how the hell did that happen? A smart guy like Nixon with conservatives around him.
Well, it may have been in Arthur Burns, and it may have been because a lot of that thinking was out of the 50s and 60s, where economic thinking was a little different than it was before the supply side era. And I have to say, perhaps it was because maybe President Nixon himself had his own focus on very, very key foreign policy issues where the Soviet Union and China were hovering influences over international affairs and very, very huge threats to the world and America's safety in those days. And I think perhaps his mind was distracted on economic policy.
Well, I think another guy who was in there, though, who was not a good thinker was the Texas governor, John Connally.
John Connally, yeah.
And all the stuff I've read, Ken Kachighian, and I'm not an expert on this, but Connally was like this quick fix guy who didn't understand economics, short run law, and kind of overruled people like Arthur Burns and Milton Friedman, you know? And Nixon was impressed with Connally. Why, I don't know, but he kind of fell in love with him. Anyway, their policies were catastrophic.
Well, John Connally was a Democrat.
Yes, right.
And John Connally was a very strong personality, very, very strong personality, very close to Lyndon Johnson, had a very strong influence on President Nixon, and perhaps that was that populist democratic thinking in him that led him to have that influence in economic policy. And I'm not an expert like you are, Larry, so I can't explain. I wish I could explain it better than I am now.
No, I understand. It's one of those. It's a mystery. The whole thing was a mystery. I mean, I asked, George Shultz, the late George Shultz, who was a wonderful man and was a friend and mentor of mine in recent years. He never had a good explanation. He just said that he finally resigned. That was what George used to say.
But in my book, it's one of the nice things in my book is that I spend 3 very good chapters on President Reagan's economic policy, and I have very good long conversations where, and you're going to enjoy it, where I let President Reagan himself talk about economics. He's an economics major at Eureka College, and he has very, very long conversations with me personally, where I took very, very careful notes, where he expounds on his own economic positions. And there are times when I wish his staff had not interfered with President Reagan's economic thinking later in his administration. But you'll enjoy hearing his long disquisitions. My book is not ghostwritten. It's written by me personally, and it's based on my very confidential notes that I took and very careful notes and diaries that I kept. And so I think you'll be pleased to read that it.
Well, I'm going to read it. I'm going to look forward to reading it.
It delves into President Reagan's own personal economic thinking.
The name of the book, folks, is Behind Closed Doors, In the Room with Reagan and Nixon. My friend Ken Kachighian, who was a fabulous speechwriter and political advisor. Ken, it's good to see you out west. I hope to see you soon if you come to New York. All right, we'll get together. Thank you for the book. Thank you for the mentions. Folks, we'll take a quick break. On the other side of the break, we're going to talk to National Security Advisor and Trump Ambassador Robert O'Brien about the return of peace through strength in the next Trump administration. I'm Kudlow. O'Brien up next. We'll be right back.
Larry Kudlow. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
All right, so my dear friend, Ambassador Robert O'Brien, former National Security Advisor in the Trump administration, and he's chairman of American Global Strategies. He's got himself a long piece in the very distinguished journal Foreign Affairs, and it's called The Return of Peace Through Strength, making the case for Trump's foreign policy in his second term. It's a very interesting piece. I have not read the piece fully. I just got hold of it yesterday, but Robert O'Brien is a dear friend. Thank you, Robert, for doing this. Look, Robert, I want to set the stage here, and then you can just talk. Couple things in recent days that we've talked about on the TV show, for example. First, America's fiscal finances are practically bankrupt. Defense spending is now down to 2.8% of GDP. It's probably half of what it should be, maybe less than half. And we had Senator Kevin Cramer and we had Governor Doug Burgum talk about how the political management of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is giving China tremendous advantages, military advantages, Robert, that if any war broke out, we would be in terrible condition. We wouldn't be able to defend ourselves. They'll have fossil fuels and we won't. And then, of course, the tragedy, the catastrophe with respect to Iran. So those are just recent issues where we need some leadership on that, okay? We're not spending enough on defense. We're wrecking our fossil fuels, our Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We've let Iran literally get away with murder. You know, that's recent stuff. So you tell us the return of peace through strength.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you for having me on the show. I mean, we know this from our years with Ronald Reagan that the way it's counterintuitive and maybe paradoxical, but the way to deter war, the way to avoid war is to be strong. I mean, that's in the case throughout human history. And when you're weak, or when America is perceived as being weak, and the litany of problems you just rattled off, and you can add the open border to it, you can add Russia's invasion of Ukraine to it, you can add the terrible, heinous massacre of Jews in Israel on October 7th to it. When America is perceived as being weak, our adversaries then feel there's a green light to take advantage of the situation, and it leads to human misery around the world, and it leads to real threats to America.
So your point is, if you want peace, prepare for war. And we are so far away from preparing for war, Robert O'Brien. I guess that's what, and I don't regard myself as some crazy hawk. I'm not a neocon, but I am a Reaganite, and I am a Trump guy, as you are. And, you know, where is the peace through strength? I mean, what are we going to have to do? What will Mr. Trump have to do if he comes in?
Well, he's being left a terrible hand to fix, but he can do it. And we saw him do it after 8 years of Obama, of total American weakness. And what President Trump will do is he'll go back to the policies that made America great in his first term. He'll build the military, but it's got to be done, as you point out, Larry, in a smart fashion, because we don't have the money. We can't just throw money at it because the country's almost bankrupt. And so we've got to be smart about how we spend our military dollars. We've got to reform procurement. We've got to stop spending money on DEI and wokeness in the Pentagon. I mean, that's one reason we're having such a recruitment crisis is kids who play college football and college baseball and high school sports don't want to go on a losing team. And we look like losers right now. I mean, we're on defense everywhere. We talk about de-escalating. We talk about not provoking our adversaries. How about we keep our adversaries up at night? How about we complicate the lives of their planners? How about we make the life of Iranian generals and Russian generals and Chinese generals difficult instead of the other way around? And so President he'll do it. But, you know, Larry, part of this article was written not for President Trump. It was written for President Biden. I think he's only got 6 months left in office. I think President Trump's going to win the election if you believe the polls. And I think the American people want to go back to peace and strength, and they want to make America great again. But Jimmy Carter, we remember those years. I never thought we'd be looking back at the Jimmy Carter years as the good old days, but Biden and Obama certainly made that true. After the Russians invaded Afghanistan, Jimmy Carter changed his policy. He had hawks like Brzezinski and Harold Brown as Secretary of Defense. And he started a defense buildup because he realized his initial policy, his first 3 years, had been wrong. And he loved America. He was a patriot. He served in the Navy. And he started to changed to a peace restraining posture, which made it a little easier for Ronald Reagan to get the ball rolling. I'm calling on the Biden folks to say, look, you had your good intentions. You thought you could appease Iran. You thought you could appease Russia. You thought you could appease China. It didn't work, clearly. We've got wars all over the world. It's the most dangerous the world's been since 1938. Stop, close the border, go to a peace restraining posture, start rebuilding the military, and give President Trump a head start to do what he needs to do to fix the country. And that will preserve a shred of dignity for Biden. And maybe he can leave as someone people 20 years from now will say, look, he got it wrong, but he recognized it and he tried to fix it, and he at least put things in a good place for President Trump to restore American peace restraint.
Well, Robert O'Brien, those are noble sentiments. But, there's a big spread in the New York Post today regarding Ukraine and how Biden is forcing Ukraine to fight with basically one arm tied behind his back. He won't let Ukraine strike Russia, even though Russia strikes Kyiv in Ukraine all the time. I don't know. I'd like to see that whole thing, some kind of peace deal, which is one Trump talks about. But I don't think the Bidens are going to listen to you. I mean, here's the thing. Come back to this other point on the economy, Robert. Reagan ran the defense budget up to 6 or 7% of GDP. I mean, this was 40 years ago. And the latest CBO estimate, we're running the defense budget down to 2.8%. Now, I know just spending money willy-nilly is not the answer, but we're destocking our investments and our missiles. You know more about this than I do. And the trouble is, Biden's running such gigantic budget deficits overall, there's no room for spending on defense when we need it.
Yeah, you know this, Larry. The interest payments be more than our defense budget next year.
Yes.
I mean, it's shocking.
Yes.
We're going to spend more on interest, and a lot of that interest is going to Chinese who hold our bonds and other foreign governments who hold American bonds. We're paying foreigners cash more than we're spending on our warfighters.
Yes.
We're not buying them the ships and missiles and planes that they need. In fact, we may need to cancel our next generation air defense fighter because there's no money for it.
Wow. Anyway, Robert O'Brien, we're out of time. Folks, read the article, Foreign Affairs, The Return of Peace Through Strength. Robert O'Brien, former National Security Advisor. Thank you, Robert. Best to Lo Marie. Folks, I'm going to Kudlow, take a break, go and do some stock market work on the other side.
It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Larry Kudlow. This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Great to be with you, as always. By the way, you can live stream us on the internet, LarryKudlowShow.com, LarryKudlowShow.com. You can hear us all across the country, around the world, throughout the solar system, including the Milky Way. And please join us during the week. Fox Business Network, FBN, name of the show's Kudlow, 4 to 5 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday. And if for some reason you can't get us at 4, why just text your favorite 9-year-old, and she will show you how to DVR the show. All right, let's do some stock market work writ large. We have Jim LeCamp, Senior VP Investments at Morgan Stanley, and Jim Urio, Director of TJM Institutional Services and Chicago's leading restaurateur. Gentlemen, welcome back. I want to talk about whether America is going bankrupt, okay? Not America, I shouldn't say that. Whether the federal government is going bankrupt, okay? I want to get you guys' take on this. You got new CBO, Congressional Budget Office numbers, came out this week. They're an outrage. Okay? Spending is 25% of GDP, up 4 percentage points from the 50-year average. Revenues are doing fine. It's all about spending. Deficits, $2 trillion as far as the eye can see every year. This is the CBO, okay? This is current law. Budgets, the deficits, the debt is going to probably hit, listen to this, is unbelievable. But at the end of the 10-year window, you're going to have $50 trillion in federal debt, which is 122% of GDP. Okay, it's an outrage. This is like a third world country. This is like Brazil, Argentina, I don't know, whatever else, your worst country. And the markets don't seem to care one whit about that. Meanwhile, the Treasury Department, which has to sell all these bonds, $2 trillion worth, as far as the eye can see, they're selling them all in the 91-day bill market, which is sheer insanity. But meanwhile, people going along, the stock market's fine and the bond market's fine, and nobody seems to care. So I want to begin with you, Jim Iuorio. America's going bankrupt, and this cannot continue forever. Something's going to break. I don't know when. I don't know how. I'm not smart enough to know. But I want you guys to weigh in on that. You first, Mr. Iuorio.
Well, this is going to be the shortest interview of all time. So the question is, are we spending ourselves into bankruptcy? The answer is just a flat yes. And anyone who wants to take the other side of that is going to lose in a fiery crash in this debate. It's ridiculous. I posted a chart yesterday of the cost of debt service and how it's just gone absolutely vertical. So this is MMT. We never agreed that MMT was the right way to go, and they decided to do it anyway. This is absurd. And by the way, it's like this thing happens with government. It's like, well, if the last guy got to spend as much as he wants, then I do too. And every new politician that gets in thinks the same way. They think it's some sort of birthright that they can spend. It's an average of federal government employees. They average spending $13 billion per federal employee. I think that's what Brian Westbury put out. It must be above some certain level of what, because that sounds pretty ridiculous. But it's absurd, the number is. So it's going to be the third biggest line item in our budget now. And once it's past the point of no return, once we have to start spending exorbitant amounts just to cover the debt service on the amounts we spent before, then it gets then the wave has crested. That is one of the main reasons I am long things like gold, Bitcoin, copper. You mentioned the stock market, by the way, too. And I don't think the stock market is necessarily flashing a counter signal to profligate, irresponsible spending. I think that one of the things we're saying is we got to get our dollars into something else. If you just hold the dollars, they're going to lose a precipitous amount of value.
Well, so yeah, all right. So there you have it. By the way, MMT is modern monetary theory. Right. Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly, modern monetary theory, and it's the most ludicrous thing you've ever heard. Basically means you can spend yourself into the crazy amounts, and if you see inflation, you raise taxes real quick. One, they can't see inflation. Two, they'd never raise taxes real quick, depending where they are in an election cycle. So the whole thing is malarkey, to quote our really hip president.
All right. So, Jim LeCamp, I want you to come in on this. I'm looking at the bond market. All right. Mm-hmm. So the 3-month T-bill it's up 536 because the Fed's holding the funds rate at 5.25, 5.5, higher for longer, which I think is an appropriate policy. But the other, you go down the curve, the 10-year is 4.25. I mean, they're selling an unbelievable amount of paper. Now, there's financing it short, but at some point they can't keep doing that. You just can't keep rolling over. And somebody made the point, it might have been Steve Forbes actually, that selling all those bonds short and keeping that interest rate high, short, small businesses tend to borrow at the short end of the curve also, so there's a crowding out going on, and small business economy is not doing well. But I'm surprised that more of the market gurus, the advisors and so forth, the strategists aren't concerned about this dismal budget outlook and the blow up of our federal finances.
It's really interesting because, so first of all, it is impacting the economy. The GDP is 1.3%, and let's not forget that government spending, which is running amok, is part of that 1.3%. So the GDP is really not taking off with all this government spending. In fact, we have a negative multiplier. The last $1 trillion of growth that we had in the U.S. economy cost us $1.5 trillion. Government is now the single largest employer in America, and the jobs being created are part-time jobs. And yes, the stock market averages are doing well, but the average stock is not doing well. When you look at an equal-weighted S&P 500, you're not seeing a booming stock market, and you're not seeing booming earnings once you separate out that small those small areas of growth that are carrying the ball, artificial intelligence, some of the resources, et cetera. Outside of that, corporate earnings have been rather mundane. So we're getting into a soggy, muddy economy, which is what you get when you overspend and your tax revenues go to debt service. They don't get into the economy. It's a morass. And like you said, once you get that genie too far out of the bottle, it's really, like Jim said, I guess, it's really difficult to rein that in. And Trump's not going to rein it in. We know Biden's not going to rein it in. And so this is something we're going to have to deal with for a long time. But here's the other problem. Japanese bank failure, they're selling $63 billion worth of treasuries. That's not going to help the market. And you have this maneuver that the Biden administration did by seizing the Russian assets and selling off their treasury. Now, once the world understands that you can't use U.S. treasuries as collateral, they're going to be using less treasuries as collateral, and the demand for treasuries is going to be diminished.
Well, wait a minute. That one, hold on. That's you're talking about the proposal. This is the Russian central bank. The U.S. has control of $5 billion. So they haven't even made that decision. They may put that to the Ukraine military or some such, give the money to Ukraine. But that's all it is. But that's Russian. That's Russia had those deposits. Those were U.S. treasuries being used as collateral, and our other governments. Oh, I see what you're saying. Right.
Yeah, other governments going to be concerned about using treasuries for collateral if the U.S. government can go seize those and sell them off.
When you said, can I get let me see, the S&P 500 year-to-date, very handsome, 14.6%.
Yes.
But you're saying equal weighted. Now, I've seen reference to this before. What's the performance of the equal weight?
About 3%.
Oh, okay. I got you.
And by the way, inflation is 3.3%.
Yeah, so you're behind. No, that's a great point. That's a really important point.
And look at small caps. They have not, Wall Street gets into this mean reversion stuff. Buy value because it's underperformed. Buy small caps because they're underperformed. Buy Europe because it's underperformed. We've been waiting on that BS for 10 years. It hadn't happened. But it also goes to show that the economy is not booming because these small companies don't have the earnings.
So that's interesting, too. We'll get Uriel back in. Let's see. The Russell 2000 small cap proxy minus 0.2% year to date. The S&P 600 small cap proxy, right? Am I right about this?
Mm-hmm.
Minus 2.8. So you're quite right about it. So, yeah, you're spot on in the numbers. Jim Uriel, what do you make of that? And I want to ask you, do you think that the rally in gold, let me just look at the gold. The gold story, gold's up 12.5% year to date, 23.21. It's off its highs, I get that. But gold's done. Is that part of this, federal bankruptcy threat?
So for the gold trade first, which, by the way, I can't believe it's 15 minutes into the conversation. We haven't mentioned it in video yet. We've danced around a little bit. Let's get to that in a second. The gold trade, to me, like for the previous, call it 5 years, it seemed like the range was 1,800 to 2,000. It just bounced in between. Now, I think 2250 to 2550 is just reflecting a reval of the dollar. The dollar is worth 70% of what it was before, and everything should really be adjusting up, and gold's one of the preferred assets. Now you throw in the fact that central banks, up until a month ago, particularly China, central banks were adding gold positions at a rate they haven't done in 75 years.
Right.
That goes back to what Jim said about if we are the arbiter of the world's finances, there is blowback if we just freeze up all of Russian assets a couple of years ago, and maybe it does create some mistrust among central banks. I'm not a de-dollarization guy, but I believe if enough other people believe in the de-dollarization theory, that could fuel those assets like gold and silver quite well, and real estate. As far as the stock market thing goes, I think the enormous elephant in the room is NVIDIA has just done so much of the heavy lifting, and NVIDIA and about 5 other stocks as well. We've never been so top heavy. I think we've been once in history is top heavy with the top 7 stocks. Now, the biggest elephant in the room is NVIDIA just this week had an outside day down and then a trade lower, which is one very strong signal of a pullback coming. Not coincidentally, the entire S&P had the same technical pattern, an outside day down and then weakness the next day. So that, to me, signals that to me it's like a 60 to 70% chance that the correction is among us, and all we have to do is watch NVIDIA because that's the dog. I mean, that's the leash. Whatever the metaphor was going to be, it was going to be an awesome one. But that's what I'm watching. Dog
chasing its own tail. I'm trying to figure out the metaphor here.
Pretend I said it.
Dog chasing tail. I don't know. Let sleeping dogs lie. I'm not sure. Listeners can text me in if you have a better metaphor. I got to take a break. So you got NVIDIA in there. Nice going.
Thank you.
All right. But NVIDIA is not going bankrupt. It's the federal government that's going bankrupt. And that's the part that really concerns me. All right. We're going to take a quick break. Well, that was a rough beginning. Anyway, Jim LeCamp, Senior VP at Morgan Stanley, Jim Urio, TJM Institutional Services. I'm Kudlow, and I'm just telling you, we're going bankrupt. It worries me. We'll be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
This segment of the Larry Kudlow Show is sponsored by Priority Gold. All right, we're proud to have them as a sponsor. Anyway, we're talking stocks, more or less, with Jim LeCamp, Senior VP Investments at Morgan Stanley, and Jim Urio, Director of TJM Institutional Services, Chicago's premier restaurateur. I got one more for you guys. There's a big essay in today's Wall Street Journal by Jerry Seib, old friend. It's titled, Will Debt Sink the American Empire? It's a long essay. Will debt sink the American empire? After growing for decades, this year the U.S. debt will roughly match its GDP. Throughout history, nations that blithely piled up their obligations have eventually met unhappy ends. And I'll read you a money quote from another friend of mine, Neil Ferguson. Historian Neil Ferguson recently invoked what he calls his own personal law of history. Any great power that spends more on debt service, interest payments on the national debt, than on defense will not stay great for very long. All right? Now, I don't want to be an alarmist. I'm just saying these numbers are very bad. Very, very bad. All right? Maybe we've done on them what we can do on them, but golly gee whiz, at some point, it's going to hurt the dollar. It's going to hurt stocks. It's going to hurt bonds. It's going to hurt America's standing in the world. Jim Urio, apropos of nothing, give me 25 seconds. How's your restaurant business doing? You know, I use you as a leading indicator.
Right. So our costs in the last 3 years are probably up 50%. We've raised our prices 20%.
Whoa.
And it's not just, people think it's just goods inflation that's going through the roof, and it's not. It's, in these what color are the Democrats again? The blue. The blue states, like Illinois, they increased minimum wage ridiculous. Minimum wage is mostly just a training program for high school kids, and we can barely even do that anymore because they're not worth $15 an hour, even though I love them. So the restaurant is very, very difficult to make money. We've decided to not make as much money personally in the short term and just to see how this plays out over the next 5 years. Our theory is, and this is not what I want to happen, but I believe tons of independent restaurants are going to go out of business. It's 55% of independent mom-and-pop restaurants are delinquent on their loans right now, which is the highest number,
really?
I believe in decades. Whoa. And so it's a very, very difficult time for restaurants. We're doing okay, which is down from doing great 2 years ago.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you're okay, but
thank you.
Part of that report is not cool. Jim LeCamp, just give me 30 seconds. What are you buying and selling here? What's your strategy?
So historically, when you have a good first half, you have a good second half, but we are very, very narrow. And I would look for a sell-off between late August and early October, and I will continue to buy artificial intelligence on corrections, not here, but on corrections, just because that's where the earnings power is. I also like energy for the long run, but you have to use a lot of timing when you buy energy stocks. They're very up and down. and the travel-related stocks have done well. But right now, Larry, we're keeping our cards pretty close to the vest. We're not. We don't think it's a good time to be adding a lot of risk. The market is extremely overbought, which means 2 standard deviations above the 50-day moving average. Not usually a good place to add.
Jim Uriel, quick 30 seconds on the interest rate markets, bond markets.
So something that's my base case right now is, remember back on May 1st when the Fed decided that they weren't going to sell $35 billion a month and they weren't going to sell $25 billion a month. I thought that was a big tell because I think they don't want to sell alongside the Treasury. Now, several of the longer-term auctions have gone okay in the last 2 weeks, but over the last 6 months, at least half of the longer-term auctions have been bad. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think the Treasury is going to keep spending like drunken sailors, the government is, and it's going to push bond prices down, rates up on the long term. Then eventually the Fed's going to come back in, start buying bonds again. That's when my trade really starts to accelerate.
Jim LeCamp and Jim Uriel, thank you, gentlemen. Money Politics up next with Liz Peek and Steve Moore.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, everybody. This segment of the Larry Kudlow Show, sponsored by Priority Gold. Proud to have them as a sponsor. We're going to talk some money and politics. We got Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, syndicated columnist. We got Steve Moore, Committee to Unleash Prosperity Hotline, and WABC Radio host of More Money. Following this show on many of these same stations. Steve Moore, I want to begin with you. The Supreme Court opened the door to unrealized capital gains tax. Opened the door. Didn't say it specifically, but they opened the door. So I have a big problem with that. Actually, I have a big problem with the capital gains tax. I want to abolish the entire capital gains tax. These guys are saying, well, wait a minute, we could have an unrealized capital gains tax. That's what Liz Warren wants, Senator Warren, and Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, this is not good. This is not the kind of tax reform that we want. What's your take on it?
Is that for me, Larry?
It's for you. I've served it up for you.
Usually Liz goes first.
I know, but you're Mr. Flat Tax Reform.
Go first. Anyway, so look, there's another element of this that it touches, and something else we should get rid of, which is the evil death tax as well. Which, is the quadruple tax on people who save and invest and build up money that they want to leave to their kids and their grandkids. So this was a very controversial Supreme Court decision. I don't really quite understand the legal arguments one way or the other, but I think it's bad economic policy for sure. Because what you're going to get here, I'm going to make it very simple for your listeners. Let's say let's say you have a farm, and let's say you're an Iowa farmer, and let's say 25 years ago you bought the farm for $500,000, and let's say here we are 25 years later, and it's worth $5 million. And now, under this plan, and by the way, Biden wants to tax the unrealized capital gains. This farmer who has a $4.5 million paper gain in terms of the valuation would have to pay like a 40% tax on that gain. They haven't sold. They don't have the money to pay the tax. So what I'm saying, Larry, is under this kind of evil system, people would have to literally, not figuratively, literally sell the farm to pay the taxes. And the same thing with the shares of stock. Small business ownership, I think it would wreak havoc on the economy.
It's wealth confiscation, Liz Peek.
Yes.
It's wealth confiscation. And Liz, first of all, you know this. You worked on Wall Street. I worked. One of the things you learn is an asset is only worth what someone will pay for it. Now, you would have this, the IRS presumably would be valuing the asset because there's no market trade going on. And this will wreak havoc over everything. But it's all phony. It's just an attempt to confiscate your wealth. And I'm surprised that a conservative Supreme Court even allowed this to creep in.
Well, I think there's been varying interpretations of what the court actually decided. And even though they didn't completely squash the idea of taxing unrealized gains, they certainly did not come out and say it was permissible. But, Larry, to your point, it's completely unmanageable. I mean, at the most simple basis. Imagine if you own a stock and it goes up 30%, you don't sell it, but you have to pay the tax on it. What happens the next year when it goes down 30%?
Right.
Do you get that money back?
Right.
That's one issue that this is why I don't think anyone actually has an unrealized gains tax in any of the developed countries. I could be wrong about that. But there's also the element that you raised about who in the world is going to be out there valuing these things. People have enough problems valuing, real assets and stocks and bonds that are daily traded. But what if you have a share in a business that has a losing year, and then it has a winning year, and then it has a losing year? I mean, the whole thing is completely unimaginable. I honestly don't think this will go anywhere. It's offensive in its nature. But the reason we need to talk about it is because Joe Biden talks about it. He says people have a 10% tax rate. It's because he is including in their basis or in their income things that aren't income, but that are in fact realized gain or unrealized gains in asset value. So it's something that has to be addressed. But honestly, I cannot imagine ever getting something like this through Congress.
I'm opposed.
And can I just add one thing to that, Larry? You and Art Laffer taught me that when you tax something, you get less of it. We want Americans to build up wealth, right? In other words, the incentive structure. Arthur Laffer talks about this all the time. If you're going to tax people on their wealth, and you're going to pass it if they try to pass it on to the next generation, guess what? They'll just spend it all. They'll just spend it so that the government can't take it away from them.
But let's go back to that. I'm opposed to the capital gains tax, period, full stop. Yeah. Why are we taxing investment? We should be taxing consumption. Why are we taxing wealth? I mean, I'm okay taxing income, but I'm not okay taxing wealth and investment. And look, the economy used to grow. The long-run trend, I was talking to Steve Forbes about this earlier in this show. I don't care how far back. You can go to since World War II. You can go back through the 19th century. The American economy used to grow at 3.5% a year after inflation for hundreds of years. But for some reason, in the last 25 years, we've stalled out and we're growing less than 2%. The Congressional Budget Office, which not only painted a picture of federal finance bankruptcy, but also stagnant growth of 1.8%. Look, we need to stop taxing wealth, investment, and seed corn that would produce, an innovative economy, raise real wages, improve productivity, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's where the conversation should be, not taxing wealth or unrealized capital gains. We shouldn't tax it. And, Steve, whatever happened to indexing capital gains? No one's even talking about that anymore.
Yeah, it wasn't really an issue since Reagan, the end of the Reagan years, because we had squashed inflation. Inflation had only been growing at, 2 or 3%. Then Biden comes in, takes it up to 9%. Arthur Laffer and I just did a little study showing that, now with the higher inflation, you could be the tax on capital gains if you own an asset, say, for 5 years and it appreciates, by, let's say, 40%, you're going to pay a 50% tax on that. I mean, who's going to invest? If you assume a risk when you buy a stock or you start a business. So, you could lose everything. And as Liz was saying, they don't give you the money back if they don't reduce your tax if you lose money. By the way, did you also know, Larry, that you cannot fully deduct your losses from your gains? The whole thing is crooked.
I know. I agree with that.
It's just a money grab. And look, none of it has to do with our budgets or our deficit. It's all about reapportioning wealth, right? I mean, this is all redistribution stuff. Because if you, and I was really happy to see, I think it's the Wall Street Journal talking about, finally, someone else talking about the fact that it is not spending, it's not tax receipts that are so out of whack with history and norms for our country. It is all spending. And somebody, even Jay Powell, finally, Jay Powell said we have to have an adult conversation about our unsustainable spending. Well, where has he been?
Right. And by the way, do you guys remember when Barack Obama was asked in one of the debates about, well, why do you want to raise the capital gains tax when you raise the capital gains tax, you lose revenue? And he said, well, I want to do it because it's the fair thing to do.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
How is that fair?
Actually, it was a TV interview. I mean, it's interesting on this whole subject. The budget the CBO report, which shows federal finances are going bankrupt. I mean, that's the only way you could put it. So you got, I haven't read it yet, but Jerry Seib of the Wall Street Journal, or whatever he is, retired editor, will debt sink the American empire? And I read this in the last segment. I'll read it again. Historian Neil Ferguson, you guys know Neil, he's a very smart guy. Historian Neil Ferguson recently invoked what he calls his own personal law of history. That is, any great power that spends more on debt service than on defense will not stay great for very long. Well, guess what? We are spending more on debt service than we are on defense. And that's going to get worse. And apart from the fact that we're going to go to $50 trillion of that debt in public hands, and it's going to be 122% of GDP, I mean, we're interest expense more than defense. Really, you think China's doing that? I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so.
It's a very worrisome trend, and there doesn't seem to be any correction in sight. And I think, after this election, somebody has got to tackle this, Larry. And the problem is, no one really has the courage to do so. I mean, it's just, and we all know that it's a very small percentage of the spending that is discretionary. So much of it is Medicare and Social Security. And under Trump, the head of the Social Security Administration, Andrew Saul, was actually trying to implement various measures to improve it. But the minute Joe Biden was elected, he threw out Saul and all those changes that were being proposed, minor changes, by the way, because what we really need is some bigger changes. And I have to say, Nikki Haley actually came out and endorsed, raising the retirement age. That sent everybody into absolute catatonic fits. But there are things that have to happen, because the whole premise of Social Security is so outdated. It was based on, people living 10 years beyond the proposed retirement age, and that's just completely gone.
Saul was a good guy. I knew him.
Very much so.
Yeah, he was a good guy. He was a pal of David and Adele Malpass. We had a couple of dinners together. I want to take a break because I've got a couple of other, but they're all big picture themes. So let's take a break now. Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, Steve Moore, WABC radio host of More Money. I'm Kudlow. I want to talk about tariffs and taxes on the other side of this. We'll be right back.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Talking money and politics with Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, and Steve Moore, committee to Unleash Prosperity Hotline, and WABC radio host of More Money, which is cooking up on many of these same stations right after this show. So I got one for both of you. Tariffs replacing taxes. This is in the air. I'm not saying any proposals specifically, but suppose you had a 10% tariff, which would replace the entire corporate tax. And the numbers here are pretty close. The corporate tax is raising about $425 billion in revenues, and more or less $4 trillion of imports, 10% tax, $400 billion. So call it a push. But it's like a border adjustable tax. It's not that different from the European VAT, except it would get rid of the corporate income tax. What do you guys think about that? I'll start with you, Liz Peek. What do you think about that?
Thanks.
This is an idea you may hear more of, like it or not. That's why I want to have some fun with it.
Well, okay. So my view of the corporate tax is that it's perfectly okay to have corporations pay taxes. I don't see any reason why they should not. But I also think it needs to be competitive with the rates in other countries. So when you start talking about 28%, 30%, 35%, then you're not. You're making American corporations uncompetitive with their rivals around the world. That doesn't make sense to me. Why should American consumers basically pay 10% more? Because that would, I guess, be the outcome on everything that's imported into the country. I think the question is, will that tariff realign sourcing? I mean, will it be the case that there's more stuff made in America because we put on a 10% tariff? My concern would be that every other country we do business with is going to retaliate with a similar kind of tariff, which would ameliorate whatever positive benefit on sourcing we get out of it. So, bottom line, I don't particularly like the idea.
Well, you could negotiate through. This, by the way, is very similar to what Paul Ryan proposed.
Yeah, with the VAT.
That's right. And had a lot of support. Kevin Brady, the then chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, in the 2017 tax discussion, the Trump tax cut discussion, we buried that, Steve Moore. You and I did, Steve Forbes did, Laffer did.
I remember that.
We went directly to Kevin and told him not to do it. But remember, Trump loves reciprocity. He could negotiate trade deals left and right if he had this authority. But also remember, corporations don't really pay taxes. Individuals pay the taxes. So you'd be giving everybody a pretty nice tax cut, which would at least offset, if not more, the tariff. See, that's what people are missing here. Corporate tax, okay, we all pay it. Consumers pay it. Wage earners pay it. Investors pay it. That's what it's just. It's a pass-through tax. Corporations don't. I mean, who's a corporation? It's just a piece of paper. So anyway, Steve Moore, what do you think? Is this a viable idea or is this a nutty idea?
Well, I generally agree with just about everything that Liz just said. I would just add to that the worry that I would have, if you could actually do it, it might be a pretty good trade. But what worries me is you're going to get both.
Yeah, no, right,
yeah.
Right.
So that's my worry. But the other thing is that, I do get a little bit annoyed when people, Trump's going to create a trade war. And I know that what Trump would say if we were on your show, he'd say, we are in a trade war. I mean, these other countries do impose a lot of tariffs on the United States. And let's not forget that other countries have VATs, which are just GATT legal, tariffs on American goods and services. So, look, I want to do what is ever, and I'm with Trump, put America first. Whatever in our interest in a competitive way to create more jobs, bring more factories here, more, higher wage jobs, I'm in favor of. Whether this or not would work or not, I don't know. It's a little bit risky, but Trump does want to bring jobs back to the United States, and this may be a way of doing it, but I don't know. I don't want to. I'm with Liz too. I don't want to start a trade war. We start bidding up tariffs because that's happened in the past.
Liz, let me ask you something else. Doug Bergen. You've seen him and so forth. Did you know that Governor Doug Burgum, who may be vice president or may be energy secretary or whatever, smart fella, he looks a lot like George Washington? Have you ever looked at that? He looks.
No.
This is
I do think he has remarkable eyebrows, just to kind of stand up for my powers of observation.
There you go.
But I've never seen the likeness to George Washington.
If you line up the pictures, George Washington, Doug Burgum, plus somebody, you know how you can use graphics now to age people. So if you actually age Doug Burgum and then put him next to George Washington, they look exactly alike. It's phenomenal.
You have to go bald.
Well, no, but of course Washington had a wig, Steve. That's what we're all going to do now. We're going to have wigs. But, so I had Burgum on the show last night. It was great fun. Katie Pavlich, who's very smart, she was on the set with Charlie Hurd. And Katie, so they're finished, and she saw Burgum coming on, and she said, ask him why he looks like George Washington. So I had this long interview with Burgum, serious interview, and at the end of it I said, did you know you look like George Washington? And then I asked him, and then he was completely taken aback. And then I said, how long have you looked like George Washington? He says 10 seconds. Anyway, this kind of hit the media news wires. But I don't know, it may be time for a new George Washington, and it could be Doug Burgum.
That is so funny.
Dial up your thing, and you'll see the remarkable thing. I have one last thing before we adjourn. Mr. Trump, he said, Donald Trump has always said this, and he said it before the CEOs at the Business Roundtable last week. But Steve Moore, start with you. foreign kids, if you go through American college and get a diploma, you should get a green card with your diploma. What do you think of that, Steve Moore?
Totally brilliant. We need to about double the number of legal immigrants. And that comment struck me as well because I was there as well. And he's spot on. You call them the brainiacs, Larry, and boy, do we need them. And these are people, we've educated. It makes no sense that we send them back to, Japan or China or Europe. And this is one of the things that makes America great. And I know we're on time. I want to say this. I think if Trump wants to slam dunk, he has got to pick. He's got to pick the former governor of South Carolina. They got to kiss and make up, and that's the way he's going to win the election.
Thank you, Steve Moore. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's no one else. The only one who moves the needle for Trump is the governor of South Carolina, and
Nikki Haley.
Nikki Haley, and she's going to bump him up by 3 or 4 points. It would be So, Larry, your job is to talk him into that, okay?
I'm still waiting for diplomas and green cards. How did we get to Nikki Haley? Holy cow.
I don't know. I love that. I actually put out a piece yesterday at The Hill, which trended all day. I think it's still trending.
How about H-1B visas?
Both of them.
He wants to close the border, but the brainiac should stay here.
Yeah, I love it.
By the way, Larry, what you're talking about is an addendum to his completely common sense immigration policy that he did loft during his presidency, which prioritized people who could make an addition.
You're right.
And it was a very good idea.
Got to go. Liz Peek, thank you ever so much. Steve Moore, thank you ever so much. Folks, I'm Kudlow. We'll be back next weekend.
Long Island is more exciting than ever at Jake's 58 Casino Hotel. Get ready to zoom into some serious cash with Zoom Ball every Wednesday in June. Win up to $500,000. 1 point equals 1 entry. 2 lucky winners will be drawn at the top of every hour from 1 to 5 p.m. to play Zoom Ball. Discover the excitement at Jake's 58 Casino Hotel.
If gambling is a problem for you or someone, please call the 24-hour toll-free helpline at 877-8-HOPE or text NY.